I have never been to Russia myself, so I've never had the opportunity to return from it bringing love with me, or to send regards from there to someone outside of Russia with love enmeshed within those regards. Long story short, I'm not as worldly as James Bond, but this is the next best thing. Let's get started. From Russia with Love came out in October 1963, a scant 1 year after Dr. No. Yeah, back in the 60s, they were not wasting any time. They were cranking these movies out year after year. A far cry from the Daniel Craig era we live in today, where in 20 years, we've gotten 4 movies. Quality over quantity, I guess? What's the plot of From Russia with Love? The evil organization Spectre, you remember them? Spectre is still kicking, and they want to get their hands on what's called a lector machine. The lector machine is a type of machine used by spies during this era to decode secret messages. A lector is priceless, and in the wrong hands, it can do a whole lot of damage. Spectre wants their hands to be those wrong hands. So in order to get their hands on the lector machine, which is currently owned by the Russian government, they decide to kill 3 birds with 1 stone and play the Russian and British secret services against each other whilst stealing the machine as part of an elaborate plot. That plot involves hiring a Russian communications agent named Tatiana Romanova under the assumption that she's working for her country of Russia to pretend to fall in love with British Secret Service agent James Bond in order to lure him to Istanbul, Turkey, where she is stationed, and get him to try to steal the lector for himself. It's a trap within a trap within a trap. That's how Spectre rolls. A lot of people will tell you that this is what they consider to be the quintessential James Bond. This is the cream of the crop. And you know what? I'm not gonna disagree with those people. This is one of the best James Bond movies ever made, and it's one of the best spy movies ever made, period. Yes, the plot is very convoluted and complex, but that's kind of how spy plots are. And this is a classic example of James Bond going up against rival factions from rival nations, and ultimately, Spectre, who's always pulling the strings from the shadows. We've got lots more firsts in this film. The series firsts keep on rolling. Chronologically first, we have our first case of a James Bond theme song sung by a popular singer of the time. In Dr. No, you just had John Barry and his orchestra pulling out all the stops and giving us a great movie score, but there was no song to go with it. Well, here, they upped the ante. Yes, he got John Barry. Yes, he got John Barry's orchestra. And yes, they are pulling out all the aforementioned stops. But on top of that, you have the song From Russia with Love, crooned by the golden dulcet tones of Matt Monro. He sounds a lot like Sinatra, but he's not Sinatra, but he's pretty damn good. Billie Eilish got hired to write the song for No Time to Die, all because back in 1963, Matt Monro crooned out this wonderful version of From Russia with Love and kickstarted a franchise tradition. Now it just wouldn't be James Bond without a great theme song to accompany the opening credits, sung by a famous singer of the time. We got you to thank for that, Matt Monro. From us with love. Another first is this is our first appearance of Desmond Llewellyn as Q, the beloved quartermaster of MI6. And Q is going to be around for another 18 movies. This guy is going to be the longest running actor playing the same character for, I think, ever? I think this definitely might be some kind of record for the amount of times an actor has played the same character. And it's definitely up there for the longest duration of time spent playing a single character. The only other person I can think of who's played the same character for the same amount of time would be Anthony Daniels as C-3PO and Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode. And had Desmond Llewellyn not passed away, he would have still been doing it. But this is our first appearance of Q, and it's great as usual. He's showing off his gadgets, and it's so nice knowing we have so much more Q goodness ahead of us. Finally, From Russia with Love is the first appearance of the biggest, baddest Bond villain of all, Ernst Stavro Blofeld. If you're a millennial, you know him better as the guy Dr. Evil is based off of. We don't see Blofeld's face in this film. We won't see his face until movie 5. But he's got 2 scenes in this movie where he's sitting in his fancy high-back chair on a big boat, petting his evil white cat and giving orders to subordinates, because that's how Blofeld rolls. It's also our first appearance of the Spectre logo, that black octopus, which signifies that Spectre has tentacles all over the world. You'll see a lot more of that in the Spectre movie itself. But we're getting way too ahead of ourselves. It's only fitting that with the first appearance of Desmond Llewellyn as Q, we get our first James Bond gadget. And it's a real gadget this time, it's not just a gun. James is given the Trick briefcase. This is a standard issue briefcase given to all MI6 agents. It contains, among other things, components for a sniper rifle, a concealed knife, 50 gold sovereigns, and a trap case of magnetically sealed talcum powder that can explode in a person's face if the case is not opened in the correct way. Of all the James Bond gadgets, this one feels the most like it could actually be something tangible in the real world. I feel like this thing probably does exist somewhere. I have a case that's very similar to that one. I have no idea if this will blow up if I open it, though. Let's find out. We're safe. Interestingly enough, even the villains have gadgets in this one. Donald Grant has the Garrett wire that's concealed inside of his watch, and Rosa Klebb, as well as other members of Spectre, have venom-tipped blades in their shoes that are retractable with a very Dorothy Gale-esque click of the heels. There's no place like murder. Now it's time to talk about the ladies of Bond, and compared to other films, From Russia with Love kind of plays this one low-key. There's the aforementioned Sylvia Trench, who we met in Dr. No, one of the only Bond women to have a recurring role from one movie to another. Sylvia Trench does not last long. She's Bond's girlfriend, and he clearly is not as interested in her as she is in him, which is kind of a pattern in these films, if we're being honest. Not a happy pattern. But our main leading lady is Tatiana Romanova, played by Daniela Bianchi. She is tasked by Spectre, unbeknownst to her, to pretend to be in love with James Bond so she can lure him into the trap and kickstart this whole plan. Of course, because this is a James Bond movie, she actually does end up falling in love with James Bond, and you can only see where it goes from there. Tatiana Romanova is considered a classic Bond lady because of the fact that this is considered a classic Bond movie, but I'm not gonna lie, she's not one of my favorites because she just is one of those unfortunate 1960s side effects where she's not written very strongly. She works for the Russian government, so you would think there would be this sense of pride, of patriotism, and of competence with her. None of those are really present. They just make her this starry-eyed lady who falls for James Bond instantly and then swoops around next to him talking about having tea in London and wearing pretty clothes, and it's just like, okay, 1960s, come on. Learn to write women properly. She does, however, contribute to the best line of the movie, but we'll get there later. The villains of the film are two absolute classics. Aside from Blofeld himself, who only makes a couple of appearances, his Spectre subordinates steal the show in this. First, we've got Kronstein, the chess champion, who puts this whole plot together. Kronstein never actually crosses paths with James Bond, but this whole thing was his idea, so you gotta give him props for that. Then you've got Rosa Klebb, who is arguably the main villain of this picture. Rosa Klebb is the woman in charge in the field. She recruits Tatiana Romanova, and at the end, she just does whatever it takes to try to get that Lecter machine, up to and including pointing her venom-tipped shoes at Mr. Bond himself. And she gets this close. Another Austin Powers connection for you millennials out there. This is who Mindy Sterling's character, Frau Farbissina, was based off of. You can totally see the resemblance. Finally, there's Donald Grant. Ooh boy, I'm excited to talk about Donald Grant. He is the first villainous henchman in the James Bond franchise, and arguably one of the best. I personally have always been of the mind where I really want to see a James Bond film where the villain is essentially James Bond, but evil. Like an evil version of him. A guy with all the same skill sets, who even might kind of look like him. Just another secret agent type guy who just happens to be evil. We never really got too much of that. You kind of get that in GoldenEye because the villain, spoilers, turns out to be another 00 agent. But that guy, we'll talk about him when we get there. The closest we've ever come is Donald Grant. He is a subordinate of Spectre. He's one of Spectre's field agents. So technically he is sort of Spectre's version of James Bond in the same way that Blofeld is Spectre's version of M. What's really interesting is that Robert Shaw, who plays Grant in this film, happens to look a hell of a lot like Daniel Craig, who is the current James Bond. They have the same physique, the same hair, the same face, the same eyes, roughly the same bone structure. It's uncanny. And yes, the battle of wits between Bond and Grant is fantastic. The only problem is it never feels like it lasts as long as it should. I want to see a whole movie centered on Bond playing up against a character of this caliber. And we get Grant for the majority of the film, but he and Bond never actually meet face to face until very close to the end. But damn, that confrontation is such a good one. You start off with Grant pretending to be a British agent, and the two of them are exchanging pleasantries, and you can tell Bond's not really sure if he should trust this guy. There's something off about him. And as the two of them keep circling one another and putting on a smiling face and pretending to be working for the same side, more things start to happen until eventually the cover is blown, and then the confrontation flips on its head. And now you know that they both know exactly what the deal is, and it becomes a pissing contest. Each of them is trying to outdo the other. Each of them is pointing a gun at the other, back and forth and back and forth, and then finally, when that tension breaks, a full-out fist fight begins, except this is a fight between two very large, muscular men inside a cramped, tiny train cabin. Absolutely everything could go wrong here. This is a fight for the ages. Bond versus Grant is one of the greatest rivalries in cinema, period. It's a shame it only lasted one movie. I want to see more characters like Grant. I want to see a true villain who is absolutely, in every sense of the word, an evil version of James Bond. Grant is pretty damn close, though. You will be missed, Robert Shaw. Thank you for your service. The best quote of this film requires a little bit of a setup, but trust me, it's worth it. James is trying to learn everything he can about the Lector machine from Tatiana. He has a little camera device with a recorder in it. So he tells Tatiana to speak into this recorder, and everybody at MI6 back in London, M, Moneypenny, and all the people from British Secret Service are listening in and recording what she says. Now, James and Tatiana have already become romantically entangled at this point, and she is really playing up the whole I'm in love with James Bond thing. So the stage is set. You have James and Tatiana on a cruise ship. He's grilling her for information about the Lector machine. She's answering, but she keeps getting lost in his hunky, hairy physique. Meanwhile, his bosses and everybody over in MI6 are listening in to get all the information they can. Tatiana is telling him all this information about the Lector, and then she says, "Tell the truth. Am I as exciting as all those Western girls?" And James replies, "Well, once when I was with M in Tokyo, we had an interesting experience." And at that point, M promptly shuts off the recording and asks Moneypenny and a few of the other people in his office to leave, saying, I think we've got enough here. That is not only the funniest scene in From Russia with Love, it might be a contender for the funniest line of dialogue in James Bond, period. And considering that's almost 60 years worth of movies, that is saying something. Now the unpleasant part, what was the most sexist/racist thing to happen in From Russia with Love? Well, I've already mentioned that Tatiana Romanova gets the short end of the stick as far as writing for a female lead is concerned. She really is just damsel in distressing her way through every beat of this movie. But that's not the movie's most grievous sin. No, that has to be the gypsy camp. In what is definitely one of the most uncomfortable, hard-to-watch James Bond scenes ever, Bond and his ally, Kerim Bey, are invited into a gypsy camp to spend the night and have dinner, because Kerim Bey is friends with the gypsies and all is cool. The gypsies are not portrayed in a flattering light. They speak in very loud, brash, broken English, and they're just depicted as quote-unquote uncivilized people, because that's how Ian Fleming saw everybody who wasn't British. Side note, Ian Fleming was also incredibly homophobic. He had a particular aversion to lesbian women, and Rosa Klebb in this movie gives off a very lesbian vibe, and Ian Fleming uses that as a way to say, ooh, this lady's evil because she likes other ladies. Again, very uncomfortable. But the crown jewel of discomfort happens deeper into this scene in the gypsy camp. Because it turns out that Bond and Kerim Bey came there on a difficult night. Two young, very beautiful women who live in the gypsy camp are in love with the same man. And due to their customs, they have to fight in order to decide which one of them gets to marry this man. So when James arrives at the camp, he is treated to dinner and a dance show, and then the dance show mutates into a straight-up catfight between these two women in their underwear. They are herded into the middle of this giant gypsy village, stripped down to underwear and scarves, and forced to claw and wrestle and hiss at each other to decide who is going to get this man they're both after. And then, believe it or not, it gets worse. The catfight is actually cut short because the Russian Secret Service has followed Bond to this camp, and they open fire on the camp, and this big gunfight ensues. After the gunfight, the leader of the gypsy camp wants to thank James for helping him and his people during the battle. So James is ushered to this tent where he is given, a bed and a place to sleep and a warm bath and what have you. And then the two women are herded into the tent. And the gypsies essentially tell Bond, you can decide which of the women has won the fight. And you can only guess how James makes that decision. See, this is the point where any sane person would have given Ian Fleming the number of a good therapist. Yeesh. I mentioned Kerim Bey. He is James's primary ally in this film alongside Tatiana. And this guy is great. He is just another one of James's amazing allies, just like Quarrel in Dr. No. He's just this wonderful, affable gentleman, and you can't help but love him because they're all always such a good contrast to Bond. Bond is just this stoic, very rigid. Yes, he's fun-loving, but in kind of a jackass kind of way. He's not the most likable dude. All of these allies, people like Quarrel, people like Kerim Bey, these are guys you want to sit down and have a drink with. These are guys you want to converse with and have a good time with. They're just stand-up folks, and Kerim Bey is great. This was, I think, the actor's last performance before he passed away. He passed away very shortly after filming of this. It might have even been during filming of this. I don't know 100%. But what's great about Kerim Bey is that everybody in his organization also happens to be his son. Random people will pop up and help James Bond, whether it's in a firefight or whether it's just serving him a cup of coffee. And Kerim Bey will smile and be like, yes, that's my son. He's a good boy. Everybody is his son. It's hilarious. And they keep running that joke all throughout the film. Kerim Bey, we love you, man. We miss you. For me, the standout sort of set piece of From Russia with Love is that whole back half of the film that takes place on the Orient Express. There's something about the Orient Express around this period of time, around the 50s and the 60s, just this luxurious train that travels from one corner of Europe to the other, filled with all these interesting characters who may or may not be up to some shady business. We know Agatha Christie took prime advantage of this. It's just the perfect setting for a story with suspense, with mystery, and even with a little bit of action. And From Russia with Love obviously has all three of those. The entire sequence on the Orient Express lasts, I want to say, about 30 to 40 minutes. It's a big chunk of the movie, and it's just non-stop suspense the entire time. The characters are trapped in very, very small compartments, and you know that there are at least one or two villainous characters on this train who don't have any good intentions in mind for James Bond. That aforementioned great fight scene between James Bond and Grant takes place in this Orient Express scene too. So every time I think about this movie, I immediately my brain rushes to this set piece. This whole train sequence is, for me, synonymous with From Russia with Love. Now, I could be wrong. My 1960s European geography is a little bit rusty, but I don't know exactly which countries back then or which swaths of Eastern Europe were a part of Russia. You see, Tatiana works at the Russian consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, where a lot of the action takes place, and then they hop the Orient Express and ride it west towards England. So I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's ever a point in this movie where we are actually in Russia, which is kind of interesting. If anybody's like a geography nerd or a history nerd and they know exactly what parts of Europe were Russia in 1963, let me know. I want to know if anything was actually Russian set, or if this should have been called From Turkey with Love. Although that sounds like a Hallmark Channel Thanksgiving movie, so maybe it's a good thing they didn't go that route. One last thing is that both in the books and in the movies, James Bond always orders fascinating things for breakfast when he's staying at these hotels. He'll just pick up the phone, dial room service, and ask for breakfast, and then he'll give his breakfast order. And it's always something fascinating. I don't know why. I'm just always enthralled by what James wants to eat for breakfast. When he gets to the hotel in Istanbul, Turkey, and he calls the front desk, his breakfast order is as follows: green figs, yogurt, coffee, very black. That sounds incredibly healthy, but also not filling in the slightest. And I'm assuming that yogurt in 1960s Istanbul, Turkey is just flavorless white goop, you know? It's not like there's little raspberries at the bottom or something like that. But that is From Russia with Love, one of the best Bond movies arguably ever made, one of my favorite Bond movies ever made, one of my favorite spy movies ever made. If you only watch one James Bond movie from each era, you know, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and now the modern era, make this your 60s movie. This is without a doubt Sean Connery's best work as Bond. Anyway, that's the end of today's mission, but don't go anywhere because tomorrow we're dipping our fingers in gold. See you then.